So I might introduce our three panellists and I'll allow them to divide their session as they wish. Dan Ryan is on his way up, a lawyer who's been involved in the think tank world in the Asia Pacific for over 20 years, Managing Director of Serica Legal and Advisory. Also joining us on the panel, Professor Gary Banks, AO, Founding Chairman of the Productivity Commission and also serving under both Coalition and Labor governments from 1998 to 2012. And a gentleman who needs not a great deal of introduction in our part of the world, Tony Seabrook, President of the Pastoralists and Graziers Association of WA. Productivity in Australia and what it means for our prosperity. I think I'm going to nominate Professor Gary Banks to lead us off.
Oh, sure, mate. Slight change of program, sorry to overrule the Mayor. I was just going to make two initial points because I think it makes sense to flow it this way, as I think you'll appreciate, before I allow two of the other eminent speakers to address you. 2 points. The reason why I'm here today is because I was on the board of a Hong Kong think tank, free market think tank called the Lion Rock Institute with Ron Manners, who was responsible, obviously, for putting on today. And what is striking to me is that we had functions not unlike this one, with very grand chandeliers, well-sponsored, Swire, Pacific and Cathay and all the rest of it, all talking about what a great free economy Hong Kong was. And yet, in the last couple of years, one of my major supporters, Jimmy Lai, was in jail. Two of the fellow directors that were on the Lion Rock Institute, who were very prominent in the Chinese language press, well, they lost their jobs because the newspaper they were writing for no longer exists. So it would be the equivalent of, say, the Daily Telegraph and the Herald Sun vanishing, and the proprietor being no more Gemma, no more Janet. They don't have a platform to write anymore. So the key message is it's important to support these types of think tanks. What is not looked after is lost. And it's unique that we can hold these things peacefully. Even overnight, I noticed in Brussels there was a national conservative movement, and Nigel Farage was addressing a function there, and it was shut down by the Mayor of Brussels, who was not quite as sympathetic to free discussion as the Mayor of Perth. So that's the first point. The second point is, the reason why I'm here is obviously diversity and inclusion. You have to include a token Queenslander to address people. But that probably sells us a bit short, because we could make it here on our own merits. There's a lot going on up there. We don't have quite the prestige of the IPAI CIS, but we have a bit going on. Connor Court Publishing, it has, with Anthony Capello, Australia would be a lot poorer for that if he's based in Queensland, and if that didn't exist, there would be a lot of conservative and centre-right books not published here. Advance Australia, which is so prominent during The Voice, was also based in Brisbane. Gary Johns has his Closing the Gap initiative, another think tank up there. There's Australian Institute for Progress, which functions as a bit of an umbrella group for these organisations. There's the Red Union trying to basically provide a bit of choice in the union space across the nation. There's CPAC, which is also based, CPAC Australia, which is also based in Queensland, which has its conference later in the year at the Gold Coast. There is Sal Grover, who's originally from Queensland, who was quite prominent recently with her court case to try and defend, women's rights in women's spaces, online and off. And I'm recently been involved in trying to set up something called the National Conservative Institute Australia, which is tapping into similar organisations globally, and just rethinking some of the liberal ideas that we developed in the 80s that might need a rethink to adjust to the geopolitical times in which we live. So without further ado, I'm going to allow Gary to address you. He's going to, amongst other things, no doubt have views on whether the Productivity Commission, as represented by him and others, has the same or different view to Euromoney Treasurer of the Year, Wayne Swan, and others. Thanks very much. Bye.
Well, thanks very much, Dan. It's a real pleasure for me to be on the other side of our country once more. The sun always seems to be shining over here. And when you come from Melbourne, that does make a difference. It's especially pleasurable to be attending a forum that, to borrow a misused expression, provides a safe space for open and frank discussion, because as we've heard today, there's plenty to be open and frank about. But that said, as you'd appreciate, this won't be my first time speaking on this topic, including here in Western Australia. So I apologise in advance to anyone who finds what I have to say a bit like Groundhog Day. If it's any consolation, it feels even more like that to me. As often happens to me, probably reflecting my career, I always prepare more material than I have time to give, and I've been told I have to keep to my 20 minutes. But I did want to keep a nice anonymous quote because I thought it reflected very well on the overall theme of this conference about the road ahead. And it states, and I've left it on my paper, if I were wanting to get to Dublin, I'd not be starting from here. And I think that's sort of true about some of the problems we're facing. You know, they're all the harder for where we've got ourselves. And I guess the challenge facing us is to stop digging. But at least I don't feel a compulsion anymore to cite Krugman's aphorism that productivity growth, and I quote, isn't everything, but in the long run, it's almost everything. Although, of course, I just did, didn't I? As the Productivity Commission keeps reminding us, productivity growth has accounted for at least 80% of the increase in per capita income in Australia since mid-last century. It'll need to be the main determinant of future living standards as well. Now, the productivity has essentially gone nowhere for much of this new century, therefore, has become a matter of general concern, if not consternation.